Just a reminder for everybody, the way Mount Washington Avalanche Center does operate for forecasting. We work throughout the presidential range, our forecast area. Our primary area for search and rescue is in that yellow bounded section. So from the summit over to the Gulf of Slides and to the right, almost over to the Otter Road. That's the way we think about it. We technically don't have lead agency and command for Gulf Slides and other areas of the mountains, though we do respond, and we certainly do respond to other areas when there's an avalanche involved. So we're, we serve, most avalanche centers operate as a regional resource for all things avalanche, and we certainly do whatever we can to assist local search and rescue teams when they have any sort of avalanche incident. Just a reminder before I roll into the main part of my presentation about the incident in Ammonoosuc Ravine. I did want to remind folks about this event in Bel Air Ski Resort. Bel Air received the brunt of a nor'easter storm, and all of it was liquid. They had a very dry year. You can see a pretty thin snowpack to that point. I believe mostly man-made snow and one small storm. I happened to visit this place on a climbing trip over the summer, and someone allowed me to look over their shoulder at the video footage of this avalanche. What appears to have happened on this low angle slope, I believe I measured it in the high 20s or around 30. In the foreground of this photo, in front of that debris, is a parking lot, and that gets plowed, and it looked as if there was probably a plowed up area at the base of that slope. There was certainly lots of snow tractor compaction of the existing snowpack, as thin as it was, and you can see the crown line there in the distance near the lift tower. So to make a long story short, rain-saturated snow on well-compacted snow created a dam similar to what we see from time to time in Tuckerman Ravine. And it ultimately blew out. And the debris that was captured on their closed-circuit TV video and pretty high resolution was mostly water. It was pretty incredible. It blew through the doors and windows of the lodge and just washed furniture up against the wall, and was quite an event. Unfortunately, they didn't feel able to share that video, but I did want to show this as an outlier event, certainly an unusual event, fortunately, but we certainly get rain on snow events, and the ones that we occasionally have in Tuckerman Ravine can be catastrophic and quite large. So when we say in the forecast, nothing good ever happens when rain falls on snow, it may not be an avalanche. It may just be you being cold and miserable, or it could be a bunch of snow coming through a doorway on a ski area. So the topic I really wanted to talk about tonight is a recovery effort for a solo male skier, 54 years old, Ian Forgaze, quite an experienced skier, back in February. Just as a reminder, this was number 16 of our avalanche fatalities among the list of winter deaths. When I say winter deaths, what I mean to say is not the seasonal deaths, December to the end of February, but our winter season, which can be basically when we have a snowpack on the ground right into June. So Avalanche, the last two avalanches have been, fatalities have been not caused by trauma, which is, you know, it's awful early in the game to say that that's a trend, but it does seem quite likely to be something that could go on because more and more skiers are interacting in avalanche terrain and really fewer climbers. So this is a nationwide look at how people are killed here. The reality for us is that that statistic is flipped. So 75% or thereabouts are killed by trauma, and you know, just a few killed by asphyxiation or a combination of asphyxiation and trauma, with the actual rare case of our hypothermia death following an avalanche burial in 2019, Nick Benedict's. So we do live in a tree-rich environment, and certainly lots of opportunities to fall off cliffs and hit trees. Though we also have plenty of wide open runouts and clean runouts where you know, survival is quite possible, particularly with a beacon, probe, and shovel, and a strong team and other protective gear that you could use. Just again, as a reminder, some things that help you survive is a short burial. And 90% of folks buried, if they're uncovered quickly, under 15 minutes, they have a pretty darn good chance, 90% chance of survival. That drops down to about 30% after 30 minutes of burial. So really, it needs to be a partner to find you. You also need a patent airway. Obviously, an ice-packed throat can very quickly lead to asphyxia at a much quicker rate. And obviously, the longer you're down, you need air to survive. And then the absence of a traumatic injury. So probably don't need to remind you folks, but it is astonishing. People come to our terrain without these three things. And just as a sidebar, carrying these things don't help you as much if you're solo, but obviously, thanks to anyone that, including the last two fatalities, who did have these on, it is good for your rescue community and your family if you're beeping. And even better, these items as well are helpful. I'm a big fan of the Avalanche, but I know that's fallen out of favor. Other folks slowly embracing the airbag pack. Obviously, none of these are a magic bullet guaranteeing your survival, but like in automobiles, you know, you don't want just one thing. You want your seatbelt, your airbag packs, your traction control device, your lane indicators. All those things can help. And Reco tabs. I'm a believer in those. So, in fact, the Reco device played heavily in the rescue we're going to talk about. Obviously, partners. We don't have a beacon checker. You really need to do a partner check, to range and function check on your beacon every time you go out. As we heard the other night from, I think it was Doug, there were at least a couple of avalanche fatalities where folks were wearing their beacon, but it wasn't turned on. And I don't think they were just faulty mechanisms. They were just a mistake. As we have a dog or have had a dog up to this point, boy, you're really in trouble if you have to rely on that, because it's going to mean a prolonged burial. Similarly, the Reco device is not your best tool. First best choice. Professional rescuers coming means you've been buried a long time. But I will say to anyone out there who's on a professional rescue team or on a ski patrol, these devices are obviously useful. You probably may have trained with them. They pick up that RECO reflector tab, but most of the more recent models, we have Model 9 now and 8 also have a switch that you can throw that listens for the 457 megahertz signal that anyone's beacon sends out. And you might say, well, why would you need that if you've got a beacon to search for? Well, we'll see in a minute that it's kind of handy to have both devices. So a searcher can look with a rescuer while they keep their beacon securely stowed and sending a signal in their pocket. So on to this incident. We had what's pretty a typical start to our year. We hadn't really even started forecasting until I think our first forecast was December 17th that year. Last season, we had a pretty paltry snowpack to that point and strong wind effect. You can see the rhyming conditions on this snow, which Don talked about as a potential factor for creating a weak layer in the snow. And we have an ice crust right beneath that. And believe that rime ice and ice crust were formed over a very hard slab from a 157 mile per hour wind event that led to a high avalanche danger a couple weeks prior. We'll get into the date there. These, the last photo and this photo were taken from later. We got from, we actually received these photos from friends of Ian Forgaze, the skier who was buried. He sent photos to friends when he was on the mountain that day, February 1st. So looking at the record here, the F6 from the summit, you can see a couple of notable things. Leading into this period of time, we didn't have a ton of snow, honestly, just 30 inches in January, which is honestly not that unusual. And I think I misspoke before. Our first forecast was actually January 17th, not December 17th. And we had pretty good chunk of snow here, about a foot on the summit. A few more upsloping events to follow. Some of these were pretty wet events. We had wide range of temperatures from fairly warm. You can see around that start of that larger storm, then generally cooler conditions, and finally, you look down on the 29th, quite cold. So -6 for a high on the summit, -23 for a low. That's 3 days in a row with quite cold temperatures at night. And then the 23rd and 24th, we also had some pretty cold temperatures. Remember, we had various crusts within the snow. The day of that Ian went skiing there, the first, we had very little snow, as I mentioned before. The day after, we had 15 inches of snow on the summit, high winds. I believe we went to high that day based on a forecast predicting much more snow than that. And what was quite unusual was a south wind that led to lift on that side of the range, and the summit only collected 5 inches of snow for that event. We got 15 inches at Hermit Lake snow plot. So that was after the avalanche that that captured Ian. So here's the record of our forecast. You can see actually our first forecast was 15th, and we went from low straight to considerable due to some of the snowfall events. Some stubborn crusts developed, and we sat in that range where we're not quite certain of good bonding throughout, left us with some elevated hazard until that next storm came with 157 mile an hour wind. which ended up not bringing that much snow. Mostly just hammered down the snow that was there. It was a little bit of a dud. Did not have much natural avalanche activity, though we had gone to high. And then weather moderated, if you recall, from the F6. Not a lot of snow, a little bit of wind, a lot of cold temperatures. We did end up having a bit of snow on the 30th, or 29th and 30th, that led to one natural avalanche in the wind slab that we were able to find, which were reported, and that was in the chute. So basically, we went into that day that Ian was skiing, which is Monday the 1st, at a low danger. We had been in the field. I specifically had done a crown profile of that avalanche that happened a night or two before, and things were stubborn. Things were quite stubborn, very little ski penetration. We did have continued concern that had surfaced several times since the start of the forecasting season of some of these facets developing around crust. We were not seeing any results. We'd seen some natural activity. We weren't seeing a lot of results between stability tests or natural avalanches. The last reported faceted layer was a very thin amount of snow over an ice climb in Grafton Notch and a small pocket. But just does go to show you that we get spatially variable faceted crusts with some regularity, and particularly these periods of time where we have a thin snowpack over our terrain, which largely consists of in our ski terrain, there's stream beds, right? And sometimes ice climbs, even if you're skiing in Huntington Ravine. So you'll have big sweeps of ice, and with a thin snowpack on it, you can get some faceting at that interface. Or even if you don't, you've still got a poor bonding surface with that cold, hard ice. Here's an overview of the Ammonoosuc side. Some folks are probably familiar. You can see the trail in the dotted line here. There was a photo earlier that Ian had captured from somewhere right around here, looking up into the ravine. What's notable is this is quite open, but it often is not great skiing because of the scouring action of the wind. It really, it's facing west. It collects the brunt of the, prevailing west and northwesterly winds. This is, in fact, part of our fetch. In fact, this area and the Alpine Garden, Big Lawn area is one of the reasons why we get such active avalanche activity over on our side and the Tucks on the east side. That fetch is quite large and contributes a really large volume of snow. The main gully here of the Ammo is the target that most people go to. We have Monroe Brook in here as well, and multiple sub-drainages that are also can be good fun skiing terrain. Here's a closer view. This is the main drainage here. This is not a lot of snow in this photo. This is generally quite a bit wider when it's fully developed. This photo is fairly accurate in terms of conditions such as we had then in early February. Just not much snow. It was technical. Ian knew it. He texted folks about it, that it would be rowdy, and he was, skiing among those boulders and some of those cliff bands. The day, this is the burial location. If anybody has skied in there, you know that this is the big flat hole with the stream in it and even water there. This avalanche during that high spell 2 days later, after Ian was buried, and this also avalanched, and we have a picture later. It blew out some trees. It was a pretty good avalanche, D2 plus, that ran across the drainage. I'm going to start this video. I don't know how helpful this will be, but I took this during the search, and you can get an idea of what conditions are like there, if nothing else. Just pretty bony conditions, a lot of rime, pretty wet that day. Partially dog searched. Sit here. The sound of the fork. Shot off to the right. So you might wonder, why on earth would I be shooting a video? Well, we're still forecasters in addition to rescuers, and this video I shot thinking, well, this could be useful information as we write the forecast the next day. At this point, we had not found or even were certain where Ian Forgaze was. Again, a close-up of this drainage. I was standing right around here when I shot that video, looking down to this avalanche path that had run into our stream bed. So I believe this is 2 days prior. This is the wind slab avalanche that failed naturally during a wind loading that occurred with not a lot of snow, but an interesting southerly wind that was not associated with a nor'easter. So kind of an unusual loading pattern. That may have been one of the contributors that set Ian up for some unusual conditions. This avalanche was about D2, D1.5, something like that, not particularly large. And you can see in the photo on the left of Tux how slim the snowpack still was, you know, just not a lot of connected terrain and lots of rocks still showing. So the day of that search, fortunately for us, though we had a considerable danger rating, the presidential range was true to form and gave us a lot of spatial variability, not only in our snowpack, but also our weather. So did not have active wind loading as expected, but we did have riming conditions and freezing rain, which was fortunate because we were forced to travel really right in all the avalanche runouts during the course of that search. It's quite thick over there, and again, the snowpack was poorly developed. So in fact, a lot of the stream beds were not even frozen over yet entirely. So a lot of our time was spent during the search, which started sometime around noon on that Wednesday, was searching those holes. So holes where the stream channel was, because one of our thoughts was, well, you know, somebody could have fallen into one of these things and succumbed. Quite a lot of bushwhacking. Tried to stay out of the runouts as much as we could. You can see the heavy riming conditions. Visibility was poor. We did have concerns about hang fire. That freezing rain was not fully, you know, it wasn't steady. So early on in the search, it was really much drier conditions. So we did have in the back of our mind that somebody could come skiing out of the ammo and trigger something. So, so it got to be around 4 p.m. that night, and darkness was falling. Me and a search team of 3 were charged with this drainage. There was a couple other teams, one in the Monroe Brook and one in the other drainage to the left, to the north of the main drainage. And with waning daylight, the rush in my mind was on to at least check the main terrain traps before nightfall. 2 rescuers went up in the sub drainage to the right, looking, and I took Lily and went up into the base of the ammo with the Reco unit and turned the Reco on. I was getting some interference from other beacons, so I was picking up the other rescuers, one of whom was searching, one had his beacon in his pocket. So I put my beacon away, pulled out the Reco, and immediately felt much more comfortable because I had my beacon on in my pocket where, it would be attached to me if hang fire or some other avalanche was triggered down on me. I always wonder what it would be like to have your beacon in your hand and be struck by an avalanche with all the things that are going through your mind. I would be afraid that holding on to my beacon might not rise to the surface of conscious thought. So with a Reco, I rounded onto this little flat area, which is basically the bottom of that main shot in the Ammonoosuc Ravine. So just you can see this strip of snow right here is where you would, that was your option for skiing out. You can see the debris pile here, even from that high, that 15 inches of snow. Don't know exactly how much snow they got at the Lake of Clouds. Certainly natural avalanche occurred there. And yet still it was pretty poorly developed avalanche track, so not a lot of snow available, but we did get this D2 plus avalanche here piled into the terrain trap. My smallest, after finding a signal with a Reco at 4:35, I pulled out my beacon and found that it was indeed the worst possible terrain trap right there. My lowest number on my beacon was 4 meters. Bounced between, I think, 3.8 and 4, so roughly 13 feet. As you might, some quick math, I don't know of any probes that people carry in the field that are longer than 320 centimeters. Your lightweight one is probably 240, maybe 280. The Avalanche Center generally always carry at least one 320 meter probe, if not 2 probes, to discover body orientation. But at 3.8 meters, 380 centimeters, we couldn't probe for the victim. So that set us up for a bit of an effort to essentially lower the grade of the snow. So we had to dig down over a meter of snow just to get to the point where we could get a probe strike. Complicating matters was this overhanging buttress visible on the right that kept us from really lining up directly over the beacon signal, and then also kept us from probing, vertically. So there were some challenges. A lot of digging occurred. I think there was 9 of us on scene here, and we worked in shifts and to continue lowering and eventually tunneling to get down to the point where we could get a probe strike. You can see a rescuer there disappearing into that hole. While that was all going on, we were digging, just moving volumes of stuff to we weren't looking for just a little rescue training target. It's a body, takes a lot of room to maneuver them up and out of the hole. So we started the terraced digging that is recommended, and we tried conveyor shoveling as well. It was a challenge till we did finally ultimately get a probe strike, positive probe strike, after digging down quite a ways. And that's a view of the hole, and really ended up being sort of a tunnel. We got the probe strike and got Ian out and proceeded with the excavation or the extrication. And after survey, first primary survey, obviously no signs of life, cold, and no signs of trauma, and no chance for recovery due to this being frozen. quite a long, hard night for those rescuers, and believe that's it. I'll take any questions.
Thanks,
Nothing?
Frank. Yeah.
Is that too somber? Yeah, I guess there's not
No,
much
it's,
to say.
I mean,
guess people
it's a hard one to watch, but it's good for the community to see the timeline and see the process. But no questions so far, unless any of the panelists have any questions that might be good talking points, discussion points.
well,
question.
Go ahead.
Question from Craig. How do you get through this sort of situation? It's a little vague. I'm not sure. That question could mean mentally as a rescuer. How do you deal with the trauma of doing this? Or it could also mean, it's a vague question, but I'm pretty sure that's what he means by it.
Okay, yeah, Craig, he just clarified the afterwards. Yeah, that's a good question, Craig. These fatalities impact us all in a lot of different ways and varying ways. This particular one, for me personally, I can't say it seems callous, but it was easier for me, certainly easier than Nick Benedict's, where he was alive when we found him and we worked on him. That one had a lasting impact and ended up developing some PTSD, as a matter of fact, with that, which I had to get some counseling through. This one was more, maybe I had better coping skills, but I really think that just the fact that it's a body recovery, and I've done many of those, and at that point, it's really just sad for his family, and it's like other deaths. The one thing that does linger really is, it just drives home the point, how things can quickly go from really fun and satisfying times in the mountains with friends to tragedy, and it just is a reminder that there are consequences, and being buried in an avalanche is just one of them, but it is certainly a real thing. And I do, having been responsible for rescue teams, I really just hope that everybody does what's right with to think about them as well, and that includes wearing beacons and basically being searchable. I think that's important for the community. If he hadn't been wearing his beacon, he'd have been there till spring. His family would never have known what happened, and that's just not something you want to do to somebody. So thanks, Craig. Good question.
Yeah, Frank, we have a lot of questions now. So thank you for the question. Thank you for the honest answer. I really appreciate that. Yeah, that before, during, and after. And I think sometimes we forget about the after piece. So yeah, thank you. So I'm just going to scroll up to the top here. So I guess, I think you kind of touched upon this earlier, Frank, or, right now and earlier in the presentation, but is there anything else the skier could have done differently? Obviously, skiing with a partner, is probably the biggest or one of the biggest factors. But anything else that as you went through the rescue and the reflection that you think they could have done differently to maybe avoid this really unfortunate outcome?
Yeah, I mean, skiing alone is the obvious thing, and I can't be too harsh. I think many of us have done it, and you just can't be wrong. You cannot be wrong. And I tend to personally ski, if I'm solo, it's got to be really locked up and really, just I got to be super, super confident in stability. And I've seen enough of these these hard slab incidents, maybe a disproportionate number of those. So I'm probably more conservative than most about going out on, or skiing alone anyway, on days like those. That being said, I ski them confidently with partners all the time. So it's just a challenging avalanche problem to predict. It's like our version of persistent deep slabs. They're not necessarily as large, but the degree of uncertainty associated with them is quite real. The one other thing I would say is just anytime there's not a lot of snow, you're raising the consequences, not just for a weird snowpack structure, but the potential to just hit something. Yeah. You know, you lose an edge in big rocky terrain skiing alone. You don't even have to have an avalanche involved, and you get some sort of injury, and that could also be quite serious or even fatal. So,
yeah, which I believe has happened in that same drainage a few years prior. In fact, I noted, so in somewhat similar conditions. Yeah, so that low snowpack obviously presents a lot of objective hazards.
Yeah, and the terrain trap there is just particularly horrendous, and I think that's always worth considering. You know, that hole that where the slope terminates, it's like a waterfall or cascade that leads into this area that is a pool of water, like literally a pool that's due to flood action, I suppose, has kind of pushed stones out to the low end. So it's like this, it's like a bathtub. And it just doesn't get much worse than that for a terrain trap around here. And sometimes our smaller terrain that you might think of as being like more benign because it won't produce a big avalanche could actually be worse. And the one place in Tuckerman Ravine that has shocked me is Lobster Claw. It's, you know, viewed as sort of the rookie run or whatever, you know, because it's like maybe a little lower angle or a little narrow, less volume of snow, certainly feels less exposed. But my God, the terrain trap there at the bottom, it's as abrupt as you can get in Tuck. There's no fan. It just terminates in a hole with trees. And it's not an active runner. We don't have a lot of natural activity. So those trees still are there. And the debris piles, even from small avalanches, just little D1s, are, I don't want to say definitely unsurvivable, but, you know, pretty darn close to it.
Yeah. That entrance and egress into Monroe Brook is pretty similar to, I think, always makes me a little nervous heading in there, no matter what the stability.
For sure. Absolutely.
Pat, do we have time for more? Okay. So I thank you for this question, Janet. Did the rescuers camp out or head out at that time of day or night? I guess just kind of the time frame. Obviously, looking at the photos, it was pretty bright when you started and very dark when you stopped. So how did that all play out? Yeah,
the timeline was interesting, and I just didn't really touch on this, but Ian was skiing Sunday actually, and reported missing Monday. Or no, sorry. Yeah, that's right. He was reported missing Monday evening, and then Tuesday, when he was reported missing, it just launched a general search. Cell phone forensics were employed, and we got pings from Littleton as well as Jackson. So his cell phone had led us to believe initially that he could be on either side. And some of his text messages to friends suggested that he may ski the Ammo, but he may also go to the east side. And we knew a skier of his, you know, fitness level and experience could also easily have started on one side of the mountain and gone to the other. So the next morning, by the time the cell phone forensics was done, we had parking lot searches happen for, you know, his plate number and vehicle. Unfortunately, that day was during that nor'easter, and the main parking lot was checked, by some troopers there right at the cog. And apparently, I don't know the level to which they were able to get into the other parking lot because it wasn't plowed. So his car, Ian's car, he parked at the free lot, a mile down the road, Forest Service parking lot, and his car was out of view. So they didn't find it until Wednesday morning. Once they found the car, then we knew where to direct our efforts, and we started calling the rescuers at that point. So we didn't camp. The rescue, we left the trailhead there around 11 or 12 as people began to arrive, and we had most of those drainages, kind of main drainages, searched in the early afternoon, and at 4:25 was when I got the beacon signal, and then all the other rescuers started to filter in. It's kind of challenging travel that slowed everything because of the lack of snow, and those steep sort of cataract type drainages. There's like a mix of frozen waterfall you're negotiating on your skis, and some snow, and broken off, as we saw, broken off trees from the avalanche activity, and then like big holes. So a lot of bushwhacking and just kind of a struggle to move around. So we ended up getting out at 10 or 11 at night that night.
And I'm sorry to whoever asked this question because I can't find it, so it's not going to be verbatim. But somebody asked earlier, do you use any special equipment for a burial that's that deep? And I'm just actually going to, as I was thinking about it, going to add on to that question: are there resources on the east side at Hermit Lake that you wish you had over on the west side during that rescue?
The one thing that would have been nice would have been the steel probes that we have that are screw together. Mm-hmm. They're stainless steel sections, so you can add probe sections together. There's no shot cord, I don't know why we did not have one. Unfortunately, I think the ones that we do have, they're really still not quite enough. They're you can imagine using a 4-meter probe has its limitations. At a certain point, it's too floppy to push down. Those one strategy that is used sometimes in deep burials is a trenching. So you dig a trench and then you probe sideways into the snowpack, and that's one of the assumed uses of those screw together probes. That screw together probe may have been useful, unfortunately, and I looked into getting more of those after this incident, and they're no longer made.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So,
sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to hit on it's a really tricky, those deep burials are with a really notable exception last year, oftentimes body recoveries. I know that in Telluride, those guys dug someone out who was buried almost the exact same depth and something like 20 minutes, which is amazing. Made me think that it was much lighter debris than our hard slab debris, and it was a survivor. You dig and you dig hard and fast and hope for the best in terms of outcome, which we did that night because we had no idea at that point. We didn't have any of that information, like the text photos and the timing. Those things were still getting sorted out. So we were looking for, at that point, we were thinking maybe he had spent the night out, or maybe he had changed his plans. I believe in that early afternoon, we were still thinking he could have been buried by that high avalanche danger day, which was the day prior. So, maybe he was benighted, right? That was one thing in my mind. Maybe somebody had spent the night out with a broken leg high in the Ammonoosuc and then gets swept out by the avalanche, right? Or maybe he's just still up there. So it's interesting how it all seems kind of obvious, in hindsight, but there's so much uncertainty to the rescue effort and a lot of behind the scenes. Hats off to the forensics being done by the Fish and Game officers and state police and or getting, information, including, I think they have a standing warrant, but for Verizon and cell phone companies, but, there's a process that they have to go through to get those ping signals and ping locations, and then any kind of calls and call times from the person's phone. So there was a lot of pre-game work there for sure. Jonathan asked a good question that I had at the time as well. Any estimate of how deep the burial was before the subsequent or the following storms? That was something I tried to determine while there. I could not find any discernible difference in the density of the debris from one storm to the other. And given the close proximity and in time, seems likely he triggered the avalanche in the evening, given the cell phone stamps on Monday, and then the high wind event and natural cycle occurred not long after that. I think that one was overnight and into the day. It was probably 12 to 18, maybe 24 hours max between those two debris flows, and both of those flows are in a very wind sheltered area, so wouldn't have been like scoured and hammered and smoothed out like you would see in Tuckerman Ravine. So even with snow density gauge, I tracked with some snow doctors, much smarter about these things than I am. They're like, yeah, you probably would not be able to tell that difference between the density.
Frank, we have time for one more question, but I think this is an important one, just because it kind of ties into the organization of your process kind of overall, and I think there's kind of a thread to tie into a recreational rescue as well. But how do you balance rest and expeditious recovery in an effort like that? And essentially, how are you organizing the resources that you have when you're there on the ground?
Yeah, well, for rescuer safety can't just be lip service. We really have to take that into account. So we, crew resource management is super important in these environments, and oftentimes, particularly midday, it's hard to get enough rescuers, and when they do arrive, they arrive and kind of randomly through the day. So you basically team up 2 or 3 people as they arrive and give them a search location. So we have a sign in and sign out process. Fishing Game was working as IC in the parking lot. So we worked closely with him, or I did that morning, to work out likely burial locations. Sergeant Over knows that terrain pretty well and had a good sense as well. But we knew that our window was closing due to the late start in the day when we even knew which side of the mountain to start searching on. So, we really wanted to hit those highest probability locations. And knowing a little bit at that point about the skier, Ian, we suspected, Ammo and Robrook. We were looking for those wind sheltered locations that would have the best skiing. And so that's how we directed tonight.